Hello friends, my name is Tanveer Atsi. I'm an art historian and I'll be discussing with you an art movement of the West called Neo-impressionism, divisionism, or also called as Pointillism today. Let me start off by saying that Pointillism or Neo-impressionism or divisionism is the only movement in Western art world which has a distinction of being a movement and a style. And why is that? Why do I call it divisionism, Pointillism and Neo-impressionism at the same time if it means the same thing? It does mean the same thing. It refers to one movement only, but with slightly different perspectives. Neo-impressionism, as we could fathom from the term itself, it talks about neo. Neo means which is new or which is after impressionism. Divisionism means where an artist divides the canvas, divides the composition on his canvas, creating divisions in terms of placing his subject matter on the canvas with the help of color or with the help of lines. Pointillism means here that a style which is achieved with the help of placing dots and color dabs next to each other, or sometimes superimposing them on each other to create an effect of light in the painting. Now, what makes Neo-impressionism or divisionism or Pointillism so different from its predecessor or from its successors? As we know, its predecessor was Impressionism, and it also lived during the time of Impressionism itself. Its creators or its inventors were part of the impressionistic artistic movement. But what made it stand out? There's a story to it, a very short one. To sum it up, in 1886, when an exhibition of impressionist painters took place in Paris, a very strange yet completely different painting appeared in the show. The author of the painting was the artist George Seurat. What had he done? How was it different from the impressionistic painting? What made it to stand alone? A painting that immediately was instrumental in creating a movement or an ism. What made it to stand out of the show it was exhibited in? Why was it so instrumental that it created an event immediately after it was showed for the first time in public? What were the reasons? The first reason was that the painting was very odd in size. That is to say, that it was quite big. Contrary to what Impressionists did, as we must have learned in the previous lessons, that they went out in the fields, they went out in the nature to create the fleeting aspects of nature, to create the transition of light from morning to afternoon to evening, and so on and so forth. In order to capture the fleeting aspect, the fleeting beauty of nature in all its moods, the painting titled A Sunday Afternoon at La Grande Jatte is a picnic scene. It is no different from Impressionism, but at the same time it's critically and entirely different from the aims of the Impressionism. It also takes into account something that was never taken before into account by Impressionists. That is to say, its subject matter, however, very much in tandem with Impressionistic endeavors of capturing life and nature outside the studios, a tradition they had broken off with, a tradition they had founded, breaking away with the Western studio painting during 1860s. This painting was something which had never before happened in the history of art, Western art. Now let's come to the points that define, that make this painting very different. I would like you to look at the screen and see the 12 important points, 12 important things that define this painting and make it stand out from the Impressionistic show. First, A Sunday on La Grande Jatte. 1884 is made up of millions of dots. Now the painter George Seurat created this painting by placing, as I said, dots of color next to each other while depicting the picnic scene on the island of Grand Jati. Forging the new style with this first of its kind painting, Seurat became the father of Pointillism and of Neo-impressionism, and not to forget of Divisionism. However, he preferred to call his technique chromoluminescence, and this came from Seurat's interest in science, in scientific theories that were proposed and propagated by the artists, by the scientists of his time. A considerable amount of interest from a number of scientists had developed in color and theories of light. Seurat was immediately influenced and inspired by the science of color, by the theory of light, and he attempted at his very best level to create the same impact, to achieve the light in all its formations, in all its scientific notions on his canvases. The second thing is, it took Seurat more than 2 years to complete the painting. Obviously, as per the size of the painting, which is 7 feet or beyond that, a painter placing small dabs of color with a small brush next to each other, at the same time relying on the color theories of science, at the same time checking the theories of light and placing the color according to these theories next to each other, so that the effect that has been defined by the theory of light, how light comes into being, how color forms the light, creates an impact and on his canvas. This complicated masterpiece of Pointillism began in 1884 with a series of almost 60 sketches Seurat made while people watching at the Paris Park. This is another factor, as we saw with the Impressionists, that they went out instead of making studio paintings, calling their subjects inside the studio. They went out to the subjects, saw them as they were, instead of creating a theatrical representation within the confines of their studios. They went out to see the originality of it, to check the authenticity of it, and also to grapple with the nature, to grapple with the fleeting aspect of it, to grapple with its changing moods, and to challenge themselves for the first time in the history of art, perhaps, to depict nature in all its aspects. Next, he started painting using small horizontal brush strokes. After this initial work, he began the labor-intensive realization of his vision with tiny dots of paint, a process what would be completed until the spring of 1886. That's when the painting was exhibited with other impressions. Third, science was Seurat's major muse for color choices. As I said, he was considerably interested in the scientific details and the scientific theories, the scientific imagination, how science looked at color, how science looked at light. Some say they see, as I quote, he said, "Some say they see poetry in my painting." Seurat said, "I see only science." See, Seurat was a product of modern day world. He was inclined towards the science and technology, and he was so passionate about it that he went on meticulously depicting each and every aspect of light, attempting to achieve the perfection in his painting. The artist was fascinated by the color theories of scientists, and he explored Divisionism, as I said, in the painting titled A Sunday on La Grande Jatte in 1804. The painting method utilizes colors in patches that essentially trick the human eye into blending them, creating luminance and shade. This is one trickery that he played with the optical illusion of the human eye, that once you look at formation of colors, remember this is also the beginning of the camera age. If you look at the painting, look at the painting on your screen and see that these meticulous dots, these dots which were put down on the canvas by Seurat, what do they remind you of? Aren't they the pixels that you see if you zoom in or zoom out a photograph? Aren't they the pixels of the pictures that sometimes burst, that sometimes get blurred, of a visual perception that led to the invention of camera very soon after this painting was done? Ancient Egyptian, Greek and Phoenician art inspired the Parisian life. Seurat sought to capture the people in Paris just as these eras immortalized their citizens, or as he once put it to French poet Gustave Kahn, and I quote, "The Pan-Athenians of Phidias formed a procession. I want to make modern people in their essential traits move about as they do on those friezes and place them on canvases organized by harmonies of color," unquote. Of course, critics were baffled by this aspect of Seurat's work, but not only critics, the public, the painting and Seurat's approach shocked the public eye for the first time. There were reasons for it. First, that 12 years after the advent of first Impressionist exhibition that had shattered and shook off the beliefs, of Western notions of art, were again shattered by Seurat's approach. Viewers who saw it were yet to come terms with, were managing somehow to come terms with the Impressionistic painting, were again taken aback, reminded of classicism by this new art, by the artist of a new scientific age called Georges Seurat. Seurat's groundbreaking, critics initially they hated it, terribly hated it, because it was something perhaps they were not ready for. Perhaps they wanted Impressionism to take a more longer breath. But destiny had something else in mind. Perhaps Seurat was the advocate of something new that was bound to happen. And it very much had happened when he displayed his painting in the show. They hated it for some time. Seurat's groundbreaking techniques were a major turn-off for some critics at the Impressionist exhibition, whereas Sunday on La Grande Jatte debuted in 1886. Other observers sneered at the rigid profiles of Seurat's objects, meant to recall Egyptian hieroglyphics. These poses were negatively compared to the soldiers. Some critics in Paris called him a cold-blooded mystifier. Sunday was revised in 1889. Seurat restretched its canvas to allow for room to paint a border made up of red, orange and blue dots. So one can see the evolution of an artist, and also an evolution of an artist who is thinking scientifically, not just in terms of capturing the light as artists of his time were attempting to do, but also thinking about the process that leads to the culmination of the work, that he is open to stretch and unstretch his canvases again and again and paint over them as he understands the labyrinthine science of light and color. Seventh, Seurat was just 26 when he completed his best known work. He was at this tender age. He was, thanks to his involvement in the artist collective, the Society des Artistes Independents, the daring young painter's reputation was growing before the painting Sunday on La Grande Jatte. But while his output was seminal, it was also cut short in 1891 when Seurat died of an undetermined disease at the age of 31. An era ended which had debuted a few years ago, but it left a trace, a remarkable trace. It ended with creating a movement, perhaps that Seurat had intended. It ended in giving a new language to the art and a subject to the history of art. Seurat's life ended, but his art continued to baffle, to surprise, to shock, to shatter the beliefs and the perceptions of the viewer, not to mention the critics of his time. The eighth thing about Sunday was largely unseen for 30 years following Sura's death. The painting went into oblivion when Sura died. The opportunity to view the historic painting returned, however, in 1924 when art lover Frederick Clay purchased the painting and loaned it indefinitely to the Art Institute of Chicago, where it was displayed. The ninth thing about the Sura's painting, most celebrated painting alongside his other paintings on circus and other subject matters, is that an American philosopher helped reshape public opinion on the painting. Now, this is a painting which had created a lot of uproar, which had devastated the feelings of the people who were, as I said, managing to come to terms with the impressionistic idiom, the way art was subverted by the Impressionists, the way Western art was almost, Western notions of art were rejected. The artists of Impressionism didn't receive the attention it deserved. But the American philosopher in the 1950s called Ernest Bloch, his three-volume book, The Principle of Hope, explored the socio-political interpretations of a Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte, spurring a renewed interest and appreciation for the piece. Now, a quote from him. He says, "This picture is one single mosaic of boredom, a masterful rendering of the disappointed longing and the incongruities of a incongruities of idleness. Despite the recreation going on there seeming to belong more to Hades than to a Sunday, the result is endless boredom, the little man's hellish utopia of striking the Sabbath and holding into it too. His Sunday succeeds only as bothersome must, not as a brief taste of the promised land." The 10th thing about the painting is that it is displayed as Sura intended. Once he had added his painted border, Sura reframed his painting in a specially made wooden frame painted in crisp white. This display choice is still in effect at the Art Institute of Chicago. The 11th thing about this painting is that its colors have changed. Since Sura followed a line where he employed a then new pigment in his painting, a zinc chromate yellow that he hoped would properly capture the highlights of the park's green grasses. But for years, this pigment has been undergoing a chemical reaction that began turning into brown even in Sura's lifetime. 12th is that it's bigger than one thinks. As I said, that it was large in size, quite opposite to what Impressionists had done. Not just Sura's most popular piece, but also his biggest, A Sunday on La Grande Jatte, 1884, measures in 81.34 inches by 121 inches, or about 7 feet by 10 feet. Its large size makes its every inch flush with tiny dots of color, and all the more tiny dots of color or the more remarkable. 13th thing about this painting is this park scenery may hold hidden sex workers, which is another aspect that has been discussed widely. The titular locale was a favorite of prostitutes on the prowl. So some historians suspect that the fish are not what the fishing pole toting woman on the left was hoping to hook. The same speculation has arisen around the lady on the right with a monkey on a leash and a man on her arm. The 14th thing about this painting is that the painting was nearly incinerated while visiting New York. On 15th April 1958, it was given on loan at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City when a fire broke out in the adjoining Whitney Museum. The fire damaged 6 canvases, injured 31 people, and killed 1 woman. But Sura's beloved work was whisked away to safety through an elevator evacuation plan. The 15th thing about the painting is It's one of the most reproduced and parodied paintings in the world. It has the honor of earning screen time in Chicago set comedy. It is one of the most reproduced and parodied paintings in the world. A Sunday on La Grande Jatte, 1884, earned screen time in the Chicago set comedy Ferris Bueller's Day Off. The science fiction cult classic Barbarella, and on the crude cartoon series Family Guy. It's been parodied by Sesame Street, The Simpsons, the American version of The Office, and even the cover of the play in Looney Tunes, Black in Action. Daffy Duck, Bugs Bunny, and I, Mirford invade the painting and celebrated Broadway icons Stephen Sondheim and James Lappé made a musical about its creation called Sunday in the Park with George. Now let's look at the life of Seurat, where he was born, how did he become an artist, and I would like to request you to concentrate, to look at the text on the screen, which I will read for you, which I will also read for you. George Seurat was his name, and he was born on December 2nd, 1859 in Paris. At 15, he studied drawing at the municipal school, and in 1878, he entered the fine arts school in the studio of one of Ingres's followers, the painter Lehmann. It was around this time that he became interested in color theory, as we discussed previously. Like many of his contemporaries, Seurat was influenced by Impressionism, which was the idiom in vogue during his time. For him, however, using scientific achievements in art was acceptable, and he was open to the possibilities of using color theories and theories of light. He pushed professionalism in drawing to perfection, concurrently reading essays by a famous chemist and a scientific paper by an American physicist. In 1884, the Salon jury rejected his painting, Bathers. That same year, Seurat exhibited it at the Salon des Independents, an organization which was formed by the artists who were rejected by the official Salon of Paris. He was actively involved in it. At a meeting of independents in the spring of 1884, he met Paul Signac. Seurat's association with Signac began from here. His interest immediately Paul Signac, immediately after their first meeting, Paul Signac was drawn towards Seurat. He shared his concerns about light, about the schemes of color, about the composition, about the scientific techniques, about the modern day world and the changes that were shaping up. He was also less interested in impressionistic techniques and wanted to explore something new through his work of art. Now, a little bit about Paul Signac will help us to gain insight into his life, how he became an artist. Again, I'm requesting you to read the text, which I also will read for you on the screen. Paul Signac was his name. He was born in Paris on November 11th, 1863, and spent his childhood in the district of Boulevard de Clichy. He began as a literary critic and a writer, but at the age of 18, he decided to switch over to painting. Unlike Seurat, Signac admired academic professionalism, yet he did not attend the art school at Paris. He also spent some months at the studio of artist Emily Bin. Later he switched to open-air painting like the Impressionists. So here let's also bring back the discussion on open-air painting. Now, what does one mean when one says open-air painting? How does it significantly differ from the painting that was done before Impressionism or after it? Impressionism, perhaps, in the history of Western art, is the only moment in which artists went outside the studio to observe their subjects. Of course, after them, they set a precedent, and after them, people followed them, but the way, with the rigor, with the passion, they went out to seek nature, to depict nature in all its moods, was something which still remains unparalleled. The biggest example being Claude Oscar Monet, who lost his eyesight because he lost his eyesight in his later years of life because who lost his eyesight in later years of his life in attempting to make eye contact with the sun, to see the different light at each point of the day, in order to observe the contours of Monet, Zola, Wagner, which was a tribute to these personalities. He even wrote to Monet and met him once, though their association did not last long and they had to part icily. At the same time, these two artists met Camille Pissarro. Seurat met another artist, another impressionist, at a friend's studio. Seurat met another artist, Camille Pissarro, at an artist friend's studio in 1865. This meeting turned out to be significant to him. This meeting turned out to be very significant to him. Indeed, Pissarro, after working in the in 1885, Seurat met another artist who showed considerable amount of interest in Seurat's technique and the ideas about painting. This was Camille Pissarro, the famous impressionist. This meeting proved significant to him. However, their association didn't last for a very long time. Pissarro expressed doubts to Signac. Let's be careful, it's dangerous. It's not a question of technique or science, it's about our tradition. It must be safeguarded. Pissarro soon after broke away from the new method, which he said provoked a sensation of lifeless monotony. The method of painting invented by Georges Seurat achieved its aim, that is extending Impressionism on a new foundation. In the late 19th century, certain scientists had become interested in major... Let's now have a closer look at the painting, A Sunday Afternoon at the La Grande Jatte. The painting represents a Sunday on the island of Grande Jatte. The work is often referred to as his manifesto painting. It is also considered as the emblem of Pointillistic art or New Impressionism. It's a landmark in the history of Western art that was instrumental and set precedent for the later generations of the artists to come, who were concerned especially about the color and its size, about the light and its functioning, about the nature and its moods, about the canvas and its divisions. And is even noted as such by contemporary critics. It was large in size, as we discussed previously, the first painting to be executed entirely in the pointillist technique. So apart from many attributes, it was one of the paintings that stood out in its time, and the first to include a great many people playing a major role. Now here we need to understand that this painting is crowded by figures. There are figures all over the place. This also suggests the modern life of Paris. This also suggests suggestive of the mobility of the people, of the picnic spots that were becoming prominent in a city like Paris during 1880s. Every detail is carefully and meticulously planned. Seurat has designed the composition in the most balancing way ever. Not even one element of the painting, not even one single figure of the painting, despite being overcrowded by the people and by the detail of the nature, everything seems to be in place, in tandem with each other, without losing or without disbalancing the overall composition of the painting. The work required sketches on panel, and Sousa went on to draw the life. Now, imagine how much he must have studied the life of the beach, or the life at the park. Now imagine, it took him a lot of effort to think about the figures. He sketched a lot, made drawings regularly of the painting, and ultimately the final versions of the drawing that have reached to us are 25 in number. And 3 important preliminary studies that he did of the same subject. Look at the illustration to see the contrast in the technique with the slightly earlier painting. Instead of workers enjoying themselves, this strangely formal figures are mostly seen in profilers or frontal positions. They seem rather like toy soldiers, like statues, and artificially noted at the same time. One critic wrote that the painting showed the banal promenade that people in their Sunday best take, in the places where it is accepted that one should stroll on a Sunday. Also note the use of color and the technique of using the dot, how carefully it has been utilized. The skirt of the woman in the center with a parasol is painted in an orange-pink blue. It casts a blue shadow. Her red jacket is seen against bright green grass. The orange dress of the young girl running to the right has blue tinted shadow. Observe the skirt of the woman with a parasol walking besides. A man is predominantly purple, so it seems, but it is made up of a myriad of hues, a number of tints. Notice the lighter yellowish halo separating the skirt from foregrounding grass, particularly just behind her skirt. At the same time, Seurat defines form by brush strokes. That is to say, close parallel strokes define the contours of the women's bustle. He consistently experimented in his manner of applying paint. In the sunlit grass, for example, short even strokes are laid over one another. It is clear that Seurat never followed any of the popular theories rigidly. Rather, he was open to interpretations. He was open to experiment, to imply his own brain as an artist and his own imagination, to believe in his eye, which was able to see the most detailed aspects of nature and the subjects that he depicted. His paintings were also intended to convey social commentary. The Grand Jacques makes use of symbols. A monkey in French and female is known as Singise, denoting a prostitute, which we alluded to previously. The smartly dressed woman is fishing. The smartly dressed woman is fishing. But for what? Then as now, spectators have questioned Seurat's meaning. Whether Seurat intended the bathers and this painting to be considered as pedants, a pair, is still debated. Certainly, in contrast, the natural world with the unpleasant artificiality of bourgeois life as these artists saw it. However, the critics applauded such elements as the controlled surface of the painting, the use of aerial perspective which gives an impression of space and Sura's deeply shadowed foreground that leads into a light, bright distance. Strictly speaking, Pointillism refers to the technique of using dots of pure color in such a way that seen at the appropriate distance they achieve maximum luminosity, as is elegantly and eloquently, masterly and carefully demonstrated in Sura's works of art. However, a pointillist painting is no more luminous than anything else that is printed with small dots, such as magazine photograph. You can see the dots above. You can see the dots in the painting. Neo-impressionism, pointillism and divisionism had notable influences on the next generation. Sura's invention had a considerable amount of impact on the later generations of artists, especially on Faust and expressionists, who were particularly concerned about the color and light. It also stimulated interest of the painters, who were interested in scientific innovations in their art. Thank you very much.